You walk into this room at your own risk, because it leads to the future. Not a future that will be, but one that might be. This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time. It has refinements, technological advances, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of human freedom. But like every one of the super-states that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace. Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
I'm very pleased for the men and women in uniform that Congress has come together in a bipartisan fashion to pass the Defense Authorization Bill. It allows detention in the law of war. We're no longer in the box of having to read Miranda rights to terrorists who come to America to kill us. We're giving authority to the American intelligence community, law enforcement community, and military to detain someone who gets to America and attacks us here at home to gather intelligence. If you can detain somebody overseas wanting to attack America and not provide them a lawyer or Miranda rights, you should be able to do it here, because this is the battlefield. So if someone goes to Pakistan as an American citizen, gets radicalized in Madras and comes back here and starts attacking Americans, I want to make sure they're held for intelligence gathering purposes and they're not read the Miranda rights, but they're held by the military, the CIA, and the FBI to find out is another attack coming.
You have the option to make sure that you can put intelligence gathering as the top priority. So this, as you've identified and talked about, is a very reasonable compromise, and as you know, my colleague from South Carolina, I would have actually liked to have seen this go further, but this is very important that we bring this forward.
And your citizenship is not a sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card, that the law of the land is an American citizen can be held as an enemy combatant. That went to the Fourth Circuit, and that, as I speak, is the law of the land. 1031, the Statement of Authority to Detain, does apply to American citizens, and it designates the world as the battlefield, including the homeland. The Statement of Authority to Detain does apply to American citizens, and it designates the world as the battlefield, including the homeland. And when they say, "I want my lawyer," you tell them, "Shut up.
Your time has
Don't get a
expired.
lawyer. You're an enemy combatant."
Can we just say that because of what we think he said to somebody in a foreign country, he's lost his right to life, and American agents can just kill him?
Our ancestors tried to protect us against this omnipotent type of power. That was the whole idea. They said, look, the greatest threat to our freedom, the freedom of the American people, is this federal government that we're calling into existence. And to protect the people from this government, we're going to have the Bill of Rights and constitutional limitations.
Yes, our president has a hit list of American citizens like you targeted for assassination. And there are indications that the list of Americans targeted for assassination is growing.
Well, we all know that their definition of terrorism in every government, every dictatorial regime, inevitably starts going to the area of people who criticize what the government's doing, arguing against it, arguing against the immorality. Ultimately, they start seeing those people as the enemy, people that need to be taken out.
The CIA has the authority to execute without charge, without trial, without jury, without judge, without appeal, American citizens that it considers dangerous simply because they're not located in the United States. Where do they claim to get this power from?
The president's battlefield powers extend everywhere, even to places where there is actually no combat whatsoever.
It's not just overseas, because notice that they've always claimed that the U.S. is part of this battlefield. That means implicitly that they're saying the CIA can now assassinate any American, not only overseas, but here, as long as they label him a suspected terrorist. Well, during the 8 years of the Bush administration, the battle was over torture. Whether they had the power to torture people that they labeled as terrorists with no trial. Now Obama's taking it one step further and saying, well, we don't need to deal with torturing people anymore. We just kill them. And as you point out, it extends to Americans now.
You look at what Democrats, including Barack Obama, objected to. It was merely things like eavesdropping on Americans and detaining them without due process and without charges. And now Democrats have completely abandoned those objections now that there's a Democrat in the White House. And apparently not just detaining and eavesdropping Americans, but targeting them for murder is acceptable to the Democratic Party now that there's a Democrat in the White House.
Well, all too often the media has become the mouthpiece for the administration, regardless of which administration is in power. I mean, and conservatives bear some of the responsibility here, because they vested these powers in George W. Bush, and we libertarians kept saying, you cannot do this. You have to assume that your worst enemy is in power before you vest these powers in there. And sure enough, now Obama, who the conservatives are calling this dangerous socialist, now has all these powers that they vested in Bush.
By undermining the linchpin for protecting basic human liberty, President Obama is proclaiming that the executive branch of the government of the United States of America has the explicit right and authority to murder American citizens.
The government found the back door around those constitutional restrictions and saying, well, as long as we're at war, we can convert this crime, this criminal offense, terrorism, into an act of war at our option, and now we can do whatever we want. We're not constrained by the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We can take out anybody.
I have two words for you. Predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote and to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Amash.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The frightening thing here is that the government is claiming the power under the Afghanistan Authorization for Use of Military Force as a justification for entering American homes to grab people, indefinitely detain them, and not give them a charge in a trial. That's the frightening thing. That's the thing that the Smith-Amash Amendment fixes. It's the only amendment that does it. I sometimes hear this strange argument that the Constitution applies only to citizens, not persons. If you read the 5th and 14th Amendment, it applies to persons. Those are the amendments that provide for due process. James Madison said the Constitution applies to persons. And logic dictates that the Constitution applies to persons. It applies to non-citizens. Is the government allowed to make non-citizens worship a state religion? Is the government allowed to take non-citizens' property without compensation? Can the government quarter troops in non-citizens' homes? Can the government conduct unreasonable searches and seizures on non-citizens' houses? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Everybody here understands that's ridiculous. No one disputes that all persons in the U.S. are covered by the Constitution. HASC claims to protect persons. The House Armed Services Committee and the NDAA claims to protect persons with respect to habeas. The Gohmert Amendment claims to protect persons, not citizens. And the Smith-Amash Amendment protects persons. It's a phony argument. The Smith-Amash Amendment is the only amendment that will protect citizens. And We have a very
Gentleman,
clear choice here. If we don't allow
I
this
yield the gentleman an
amendment,
additional
we will not-
15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 15 seconds.
We have a very clear choice here. A federal court has ruled Section 1021 in the NDAA unconstitutional. There is one amendment that fixes it. Will you do it? And if you don't, how will you explain it to your constituents? Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
My constituents, as your elected representative, I can assure you Labour's right, management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor, management, politicians, phooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
Pardon me. Pardon me. And who are you, my good man? I'm John Q. Public. Ah, my fine friend, you're just in time to share this generous and gigantic offer. Sign right here. Mind if I read it first? Including my freedom. Freedom? Well, sign away my freedom. Why, this is ridiculous.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
The farm vote will put a stop to this.
Farmers don't vote anymore.
What'll I do for seed next year?
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on. We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything!
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance, you know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. Don't throw those bottles.